Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to do an updated version of this video for you. It's been a while since I did that F36 build, and I showed you guys how to build it from scratch with using your own components, an all-in-one camera and your own flight controller, and it had a little mini controller that came with it. But this version comes with everything you see here on the table, and it has a built-in receiver on there. They have three choices of receiver. You can either use the FrSky receiver, which is what I have right there. You can also use the integrated FlySky receiver, or you can choose to use the Spectrum DSM2 module on there. So depending on what protocol you need for your radio, you can choose that. Various different kits are available for those three different protocols. So I wanted to clear up some confusion on this build for some people, because on RC groups there seemed to be quite a bit of questions that everyone had, and I just want to make this as basic as possible if you're doing this for the first time, if you're a new guy just getting into FPV and this is something that you're interested in. This is going to be a great video for you. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through what I think is the first step to get started for this build, which will be flashing your flight controller. This is the little Furry Bee F3, and you can do clean flight or you can do Betaflight. So go ahead and go to the Chrome web store and download the app for Betaflight. We're going to go ahead and put Betaflight on this one, and the next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to have a soldering iron handy. You're only going to have to do a few solders on this board. Don't be afraid. This is all good fun. So let's go ahead and get started with soldering up the boot button to make sure that we have solder bridge on this little boot button right here, and that will put it into firmware bootloader mode, so we can go ahead and flash Betaflight firmware on this board. Now pick up your flight controller and look at it from the very front, and this is where your bind button is going to be for your built-in receiver. And what you'll need to do is clean off the tip on your soldering iron real quick before you start, and try to use something with a sharper tip, just like what I have here. This is a Hakko soldering iron. You can find those on Amazon. But you're going to see these two little tabs right next to each other right here, and that is the boot tab section right there for the bootloader. Just go ahead and touch it with your soldering iron and make sure that the solder bridges from tab to tab right there. And once you see that you have a connection, it will put it in bootloader mode. If you need to have a little bit of dab of solder on there, you can also do that to fill in this gap, and that will allow you to go ahead and flash the Betaflight firmware on your flight controller. Okay, so I'm all done bridging those two tabs right there, and you can see it's just a solid bit of solder there now, and I'm ready to go ahead to move over to Betaflight. Okay, now go ahead and open up your Betaflight app and go ahead and grab your flight controller and plug it into the smaller side of your USB port. That's the micro USB side, just like this, like right here. Now we have that bootloader tab is soldered and bridged and ready to go. Go ahead and go to firmware flasher here on the screen and choose SP Racing F3 in that top tab right here. The next one down, you want to choose the latest version of SP Racing F3, which in our case we have 4/10/2017, so that's pretty recent. We're going to do no boot resequence here. Flash on connect, we can leave that off. We can actually leave off full chip erase there, and we can leave the manual baud rate set to 115/200, and go ahead down to the bottom, scroll down to the bottom here and click on load firmware online. You will need to be connected to your home Wi-Fi. So I'm going to go ahead now that I have this plugged in, I'm going to take the other end, the larger end, and plug that into my USB port. And it won't do anything right away, but you will need to just press flash firmware down at the bottom. So once I have my board plugged in, I'm going to wait just a second. You'll see it light up just like this. Now wait a moment before you click flash firmware. And I'll go ahead and click flash firmware. Now it's executing the local erase, and you can see it started that procedure down at the bottom. It's going to go all the way across, and it usually takes about a minute or so to do this, sometimes quicker, and it's still going. But if you do it just like I'm doing here, it should totally flash, and you shouldn't have any issues or any problems. And when you get to about the 3/4 point all the way across, it should start verifying and finishing up this flashing process. So now it is verifying. And you could disconnect it at this point, but don't do that. Let it go ahead and finish the verification process, and it will finish up. Now next, when it is finished, we're going to disconnect this cable and take the tab that we did earlier with the bridge. We're going to take that solder back off those two tabs, and I'll show you how to do that. Now we're successful. You saw it beep green, so we're good. Now we can disconnect the cable and go back to the soldering iron. Now we're going to use this solder sucker tool. You can get these on Amazon.com. They're probably about $5 or $6. Just go ahead and push the button down here all the way down. You're going to press this button to suck that little bead of solder off the boot section right here. Now it's kind of a two-step process. You're going to have to heat it up first with the iron, and if you have some helping hands to hold this, that would be great. And you can heat it up with the soldering iron and pull that boot tab off. What we're going to do is try to separate that as well. I'll try to do this here on camera for you so you can see what happens. I'll just gently heat that up, get that right up close to it, and try to suck it off. Let's see if I did it on the first try. If we look at it up close, get the camera to focus there, you see that these two tabs are now separated right here. Now, as far as power connectors, I don't want to confuse anybody too much, but there are a few different styles that you can choose from, and some people say that this larger connector, this larger JST style connector, is very good for maximum power and getting a lot of power out of your tiny whoop setup. It's just a little larger than this traditional one. This one, they say, has a little more bottleneck to the power. It just depends on your flight style as well. So if you want more punch, you can go with something a little larger like this, but you're going to have to get batteries that connect to this one as well that are compatible with that one. The next style is you can get this hub sand style connector here, and this actually came with the kit, and that is no problem. You can get batteries for that as well very easily, little 1S batteries. Now also you can use this style, and this is pretty traditional for tiny whoops and Inductrix FPVs. The tiny whoop batteries have that little tiny connector on there, and so do the E-Flight ones, as well as some of the cheaper Crazy Pony and Furry Bee versions of this battery connector. We will go ahead, try to post some links to batteries down below for you so you guys can pick which one you want. Now after you choose which connector you want, go ahead and tin up the wire tips on the end of your battery terminal here. Just go ahead and put a little bit of solder and coat those wires. Make sure that the wire gets nice and hot, and then let go. And now we're ready to solder it down to the flight controller terminal. You can start with the ground wire. The ground wire goes right back here, and it always helps if you put just a little bit of solder on your soldering iron tip. It just kind of helps solder get started and liquefy. And you want to make sure both surfaces are nice and hot. And go ahead, and when you think you have it liquefied, go ahead and let go, and it should make a nice solid connection. If it does, you'll see it looks super silver. If it looks kind of tarnished, like what you see here on the iron, if it looks really gray, that means you had a cold solder, so you need to redo it. So you want it to look nice and silver like that. Be sure to clean the tip of your soldering iron off between each solder with a little bit of steel wool. Just go in there and clean it off. Now the positive terminal is right here. I'm just going to touch down on this positive terminal. Get some heat to that tab right there. See if I can get it to liquefy. And once it's liquefied, and you see the wire is nice and hot as well, you can let go. And then give that wire a tug. And make sure that it's nice and sober looking too. So if it's dull or not shiny, you need to do it over. So we're just going to let those hang off the back just like this. Now maybe just use a magnifying glass just to check that you have plenty of solder on those two tabs. If you need to add just a little more solder, you can come in with just a little bit of solder at the same time and add a little more in there. Now go ahead and grab a battery. We're going to bind this up to the receiver. So go ahead into your F36 model on your Taranis and page over till you see the main screen and setup there, and scroll all the way to the bottom. At the bottom of this list, you'll see D8. Have that selected, channel 1 through 8 there, and select the bind process there and push the button down, and you should start the bind process just simply like that. Now go ahead and hold down this bind button here and plug in a battery. And it only takes a moment to do this, so make sure you got your polarity right. Okay. And after about 5 to 10 seconds, the Taranis binds really fast, so you don't have to wait too long. Now go ahead and unplug the battery from your flight controller and exit there on your screen. Go back to your main screen on Taranis and plug this in. You should hear something from your Taranis.
Telemetry recovered.
So now we have telemetry coming from the Taranis to the flight controller, so we're good to go there. And if I unplug it, you'll hear this.
Telemetry lost.
Okay, so go ahead and open up your Betaflight app again and take your connector, put it in the USB port here. Make sure the flat side is on the correct side. Push it in just like that and wait for it to load up and say SLab USB to UART. Go ahead and click connect, and now you can see your board orientation. You're going to have that power cable coming out the back, so if you face it towards you, you should see back. You can check your orientations by going back like this, to the left and to the right, and it should work just like you see on the screen there. Now I'm just going to walk you through a few things over here on the left for your board setup. If you click on ports, the second tab down on the left over here, you're going to see your port identifier, and you should just leave UART1 checked there. You always want to have that checked, because if you uncheck this and save it, then you won't be able to connect to your board. So very important, leave that the way it is. And we're going to leave all these serial RXs unchecked, because we are not going to use serial RX on this particular receiver. So we're all good there. Now we're going to go down to configuration. We're going to change the ESC motor features to brushed and save and reboot there. That way the flight controller knows it's running brushed motors. We're not running one-shot 125 on here, so that's kind of important that you select brushed. Now go ahead and scroll down the bottom of the page here. We're going to leave VBAT the same. The current meter is all going to be the same. We're going to leave the gyro update frequency at 2 kHz and 1 kHz for the PID loop frequency. Leave the accelerometer on, because some of you guys might want to fly this in stabilized mode. That's totally okay. We're going to leave black box. We can actually turn off, but this board actually does have 256 kilobytes of onboard storage for black box data. If you choose to use that, you can turn that on as well. Let's see, transponder. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to go ahead now and reboot, save and reboot. You'll come back to that configuration screen. Now go down to the next one down. It's fail-safe over here. We're going to set it to drop if it loses signal. Go ahead and save and reboot there. And when you come back in, go down to PID tuning. We're going to leave all these defaults the same here for this initial setup. We can tweak some of these PIDs later. You might be able to find some extra PIDs on the RC Groups forums if you need to tune yours or have a little better tune on it. These 9 screens right here are the ones you're going to change. These over here, proportional, integral, and derivative. Now over on the super rates, over here, that's going to control how fast your flip and roll rates are. We're going to leave all that the same at 0.70 all the way across there, just in case you can't see that. Go ahead and save that. And next thing we're going to go down to is the receiver tab. We're going to check all the channel maps here, and this is kind of important. Go ahead and turn on your radio, and once that loads up, go ahead and plug in a battery. Okay. Now my auxiliary 5 channel's freaking out a little bit, but I can fix that in the radio. We're going to go ahead and plug in a battery. Now let's just see, just in case it works without a battery plugged in. So this receiver, it has to be pretty close to the radio, by the way, but it will power up without a battery plugged in. If you're having issues, you can go ahead and plug in a battery. And now we can check out how the channel maps are set up. Okay, so I'm going to back up and show you what my sticks look like versus what you see on screen here. Okay, so now you have a little bit of a close-up of the channel maps, and we see the throttle stick. Let's start with that first. So if you push up on your throttle, it should come all the way up to just about 2,000. If it doesn't go all the way up to 2,000, you might be able to set that in your channel endpoints on your radio. Just set up your endpoints from 1000 to 2000. It should be about 1500 right at center stick right here. If you're just getting into this, don't worry about that point. Just making a point for other people. Now the next one we'll check is yaw, and this blue one right here that goes out to about 1500. This is the yaw channel right here. So we're going to go left first, and you should see it move left. And then we're going to go all the way right. You should see it all go all the way out, and then let go of the stick. It should come back to center right about 1500. And now we're going to go to the next stick. That's going to be roll. That's up at the very top. This is the roll axis, the red one, the red bar right here. If I go left, it should go left. Right should go right. Next one down would be pitch, forward and backwards. So if I go forward, it should go up, all the way up over to here, and down all the way back over here, just like that. Now I can check my modes. I have my arm switch. It's going to be auxiliary 3 over here on this switch. And I like my modes to be on this 3-position switch right here. So I'm going to check, see that's on auxiliary 1. And if I had a beeper, it would be on this switch right here on auxiliary 2. But I don't have a beeper on this tiny wheel. Don't probably have room for one actually. So this looks pretty good for now. So now I can go ahead. Now that I know my receiver channel for my switches, I can go ahead and go to modes. So the first mode that I'm going to set up is going to be my arm mode, and you can go back to receiver just to double check which one that was. That was actually aux 3 for me, so I'm going to add the arm range all the way out to the end here and just slide that over by dragging this bar over all the way to the end, and we're going to select channel 3 there, or auxiliary 3. And hit save. Now test that. You'll see a little gold bar all the way on this side, and if you flip the switch, it should move over into this area. Now you can take this little white tab over on the far left and drag it in. Just make it a little tighter here, just like that, and go ahead and hit save. And now if we had motors hooked up, you would hear it start to arm, and you can throttle up. So that's the way you add a switch on your radio, and I definitely recommend doing that. We're going to add angle mode next, and I believe that was on auxiliary 1 was my modes, and I can go back to the receiver just to double check that. Okay. Yes, that was auxiliary 1, so we'll go back here and leave that on auxiliary 1. Now we're going to drag this gold bar over here, shorten in these tabs, and press save. Now we're going to add horizon. So we're going to go down to the next position. The middle position of that switch will be horizon. So we want those gold bars to be here. Just drag in those 2 tabs, make it a little tighter, just like that. Now we're going to press save over here on the far right. Just like that, okay. And now we have air mode on the 3rd position down. This gold bar moves all the way out to the outside edge out here. Will be in acro. Now if you wanted to add air mode to that, you can add air mode a couple different ways. You can do it so that you have air mode available in all of your different modes like this, or you can drag it back to have it on horizon mode and acro mode. What I generally like to do is I like to have air mode on my acro mode setup, so I'm going to drag it all the way over just like this and press save. So the air mode is only active when I'm in acro. So now notice the air mode goes off when I switch back to horizon, and angle is open there. So angle, horizon, and acro mode. So you don't have any other tab here for acro. So guys that don't know how to add acro, there is no position here anywhere on the left side of the screen to add acro. So don't get confused. Just leaving it blank on the end on that 3rd position switch down will actually have it in acro mode. So if you're new, that's the way you set up acro. Okay, so now we're to the point we can go ahead and start working on the frame again, and you could have done this earlier, but I like to just go ahead and get the Betaflight part out of the way. We're going to hook up the camera now. Go ahead and grab your camera cable, which is this one. It's going to plug in on this end on the side of your VTX camera combo, and you're going to solder onto these 2 points right here. You see ground and you see 5-volt little pin right next to it. These are 2 little tabs just above this hole, ground and 5-volt right there. So go ahead and snip these off just a little shorter. I think they're a little bit long as they come from the factory, and go ahead and tin these 2 wires up and get them ready for soldering. Okay, so now I have both of those soldered on. I have my 5-volt line here and my ground line soldered on there. And just make double sure that you don't have any bridging happening here. You don't want solder to run over from this pad to the other because you'll short your camera out. Just be very, very careful and use a magnifying glass to get in there and to see that these two are definitely not touching, as you can see there. And make sure that your solders are nice and shiny. Now go ahead and grab your camera and we can plug in the VTX power cable. Just make sure that these pins go out toward the front of the camera. Plug those in just like that. Now we have some power to our camera. And when we mount this on top, we're going to have this antenna coming out and maybe over to the side. And what you could do is just add a little piece of hot glue here to hold it down and out of the way of the camera. We can tuck this power cable back behind here and also maybe tidy that cable up as well. But that's about how this is going to sit on this board for your camera view. So now you should be to the point where you can go ahead and grab your frame, and we're going to mock up how we're going to put this on the frame itself. So it should be something like this with the USB port in the very back of the frame, and we're going to have this run through this hole right here and underneath to plug in our battery. Let's go ahead and grab my tweezers and pull that through there. And you want to make sure that the front of the frame has the battery bay with the wall in the front, so if you do crash, it stops the battery from coming forward. So that's how you know the front of the frame. And then this will just go right on top like this with a piece of VHB. And now what we need to do is grab our foam inserts and our little tiny flight controller mounting screws and a Phillips head screwdriver and start mounting the flight controller to the frame. Okay, so now I have the foam inserts underneath each screw and they're mounted. Don't forget that your fourth screw goes here on the very back of the flight controller and that the piece of foam needs to go underneath under here. So it took me about 10 minutes to get all this situated right before I could start tightening down the screws. And one word of advice, do these two and this front one first. Loosen these up both a lot. Lift up the flight controller a little bit and shove this bottom piece of foam underneath this back one right here. Just make things a little easier than trying to start out with this one and then go to these. So now go ahead and get your motors, and you're going to put your motor down into the motor mounting bracket and bring your wire up through the bottom like this. Have it hanging out. Just go ahead and feed the wire down through the top of the frame where the motor goes through and bring the wire out on the side where you'll see that the wire tucks into the frame. Once you get this motor down, it should just slightly, ever so slightly, come to a stop at the end right here. Just like this. So it should come all the way down to about this point. And leave a little room at the very bottom there so that this wire doesn't get pinched. Now these particular motors don't have color-coded wires for telling us which one is clockwise and which one's counterclockwise. This one is clockwise and this one is counterclockwise. So your gray bottom motor, just like right here, that's going to be your right turn motor, and your white bottomed one is going to be your left turn counterclockwise motor. So like I always say, start out with the right rear, and that's going to be this one right here. Go ahead and put this one down through there and run the wire to the board. Directly across from that, you'll also want a gray bottomed motor. And then on this side and this side, you'll want two white bottomed motors. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mount this all-in-one camera to the flight board and get that ready and set up just a little tiny bit of tilt on it maybe as well. But there's two different ways you guys can do this. Get some 3M VHB, order this off Amazon or get it at Home Depot, and cut a little strip off just like this. You can mount it just using this, peeling off this side so it's sticky on both sides, and sticking it down to the flight controller just using this, and it literally doesn't pop off that much at all. It's actually pretty secure if you do it like that. It's going to be a little lighter than going this route. You can also use a mounting bracket specifically for FPV all-in-one flight cameras. I'll try to put a link down below. It just fits right in just like that, and depending on what kind of wire setup you have, it will actually have a little space for the wire and the chip on the back right here. So this is kind of a nice way to go, but this also adds a little more weight to your build. So if you're looking for minimal weight, do it just like this with a little bit of VHB here on the bottom stuck down to the flight controller. Now, just to be fancy, I'm going to use this little camera mount here. Now, if you have your wire a little bit long, go ahead and twist your camera up and be sure to pay attention which way is forward on your frame. Remember, the USB port is very back. So we're going to go ahead and slide this in the camera mount. And I have a VHB piece, a little tiny piece inside here to hold it down. Now I'll just simply go ahead and stick it right on top of the board. Make sure that I have it centered up and pointing in the correct direction here, centered in the very dead center of this flight board. Okay, cool. So now your camera setup should look something like this. If you only used a piece of VHB underneath this and you didn't use the camera mount, make sure that you have enough VHB to cover the entire perimeter of this camera, because you don't want this camera coming in contact with the surface of your flight controller or you'll short something out. So pretty important that you do that. But this is a pretty slick looking layout. Now all I need to do is plug in my motor wires on the bottom to each corresponding connector on the flight controller. So when you're routing your wires down through your frame, go ahead and push it under this little tab here with your fingernail and just run it along this groove right here. And if you have a pair of tweezers, that will definitely help you plug these in to the ports on the flight controller. Take your time and make sure that you don't pinch any of these wires or sever the silicone on the outside of the wire. So once you have one of your connectors in place and it looks like it's ready to push down, just go ahead and really gently use the end of your tweezers or your finger and try to push them down. It's kind of hard to get your finger in there, so generally I use my tweezers and I try not to touch the wire or the connector tabs right there when I'm pushing that in place. Just make sure you push on the plastic tab here and make sure it's firmly seated in place, and squash the rest of the wire down inside the frame just like that. It should look just about like what I have there. Okay, so now you're at the point where you plugged in your motors, you have everything tucked inside there, everything looks neat all the way around, all your wires are sticking in nice and close to the frame, and you also have the wire underneath this little tab here. It really helps during that process to use a pair of tweezers. If you have a pair near, just be careful that you don't sever any of the wires or damage the board while you're pushing those in. Be very, very gentle with these types of wires. They will sever super easily. Now plug in a battery and turn on your Taranis, and you should be able to fire up your motors now. See how mine turn automatically on, and I'm getting throttle. Now we can also set the motor rate to 32,000 inside Betaflight, and as a safeguard I will show you how to do that. If yours turn on and they won't go off, it might mean that you need to set the PWM motor rate. Okay, so now that we have everything plugged in, all the wires run, let's go ahead and do a motor test real quick. We want to make sure that everything is turning the right direction, that you have each motor in the corresponding port for your direction, your prop direction. So go ahead and reconnect to Betaflight and go down to the Motors tab, click on I understand the risks, and let's test one motor at a time here. So we're going to start out with number 1, that's the right turn motor right here, and I'll try to hold it up so you can see it. Just barely push that up. You don't need to go full throttle with it, just a little bit of throttle, and it'll show you that it is turning right. So that one's good. We'll go up to motor 2, that's this one. It should be a left turn. That one should go to the left like that. Motor number 3 is in the left on the rear there, and that one should turn just like that to the left. Okay, we can see that clearly goes to the left. Now motor number 4 up top in the front on the left is going to turning to the right. So everything technically should be good for a takeoff. Now the next thing we'll need to do is set the motor PWM rate, and you do that by going down here to the CLI, and I already have it copied and pasted in here on the screen for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Command V there. I'm on a Mac. Press return. So what you want to do is set the motor rate, PWM rate, to equal 32,000. And the way you do that is using this right here. Motor underscore PWM underscore rate space set space to space 32,000, and then after you hit return, type in save and hit return again, and the flight board's going to reboot, and now your motors should be set up correctly. Okay guys, that's it for our little F36 Tiny Whoop build. That was pretty simple to build and actually a lot of fun. You have to take your time just to tuck the wires underneath and make sure you get the correct motor bottoms on the correct turning spot according to the flight controller, and make sure you test all that in Betaflight. Everything went pretty smooth during the build, and I just want to give you one word of advice. When you're using these little prop remover tool, I have it sitting over here. If you're using this tool, be extremely careful when you pull these props off, because you can pull the motor all the way out and actually damage the wires up inside here. So what I tend to do is push the motor up and out a little bit, and then I hold the motor with my fingernail and I remove the prop with the prop remover tool so that I don't pull this motor out and damage the wire. So that's pretty important. Now when you're putting your props on, pretty simple. I always say to new students in drone camps, right rear. So RRR, right turn rear. So start with the right rear prop, put that one on because that one is going to be your right turn prop. You'll see the leading edge faces up, and that's the one you want to put there. Now directly across from that will also be a right turn, and then you know that the other two are left turn. So motor number 1 is right turn, motor number 2 is left, motor number 3 is left, and motor number 4 is right. So now I have a charged up battery on there, and I can go ahead and do my first flight test. And you can do that indoors or outdoors. I would probably do it indoors because these are super light and they blow around a lot with the wind. So go ahead and arm it, and you should be able to take off. Looks like we're good to go. Flying kind of low, a little bit of ground effect going on there, but you can see that all the controls are working correctly. My yaw is right, roll and pitch are right, so I am good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and take some flights around my house and have fun with my new F36 Tiny Whoop. So thanks again, you guys, for joining me on the Drone Camps channel. If you have someone that's new that's getting into FPV, I highly recommend that they build a Tiny Whoop style FPV racer. Super fun indoors. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one.